Can you hear me well?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Okay. Let's start then. So welcome to the second edition of the karaoke reading group. I just recall the principle. So it's a karaoke with a teleprompter, but without music. So instead of singing songs, we will be reading texts. And namely, this evening, we'll be reading text of David Graeber, and not just any text, because it's his most famous book, one of the most famous, Debt, the First 5,000 Years of History. So David used to say that about this book, that it looks like everyone has read it. So it seemed to be the right choice for our first karaoke with a theme. Especially also because it's the 10th anniversary of its publication, and it's also the 10th anniversary of Occupy. So without any further delay, I'll give way to our performers of the day. In that order, it's going to be Nika, Simona, Carlos, Sevda, Mark, and Steve. And I did so according to the position of the text, according to the position of your text in the book. So Nika, it is your turn, and you will introduce us to the central question of the book. Would you like to first say something about the text? I recall that you can do that either now or at the end, or not at all. It's really up to you.
So I want to say that it's so much true that the language of capitalism and that is so much embedded in our day-to-day vocabulary that, for example, I grew up in Soviet Union and we didn't have a capitalistic economy. We were living in socialism, but still it was very much in place. For example, it was very common to say that your grandmother gave you an apartment, or like you are living here and there, because mostly the housing was the major valuable thing in Soviet Union. Yeah, so I don't know, it's very much part of my daily life as well. And I wonder what can happen to us if we will be able to live in a world where the value system will be different and the language will change. In any case, so I'll start to read. Here we come to the central question of this book. What precisely does it mean to say that our sense of morality and justice is reduced to the language of a business deal? What does it mean when we reduce moral obligations to debts? What changes when the one turns into the other? And how do we speak about them when our language has been so shaped by the market? On one level, the difference between an obligation and a debt is simple and obvious. A debt is the obligation to pay a certain sum of money. As a result, a debt, unlike any other form of obligation, can be precisely quantified. This allows debts to become simple, cold, and impersonal, which in turn allows them to be transferable. If one owes a favor or one's life to another human being, it is owed to that person specifically. But if one owes $40,000 at 12% interest, it doesn't really matter who the creditor is. Neither does either of the two parties have to think much about what the other party needs, wants, is capable of doing, as they certainly would if what was owed was a favor or respect or gratitude. One doesn't need to calculate the human effects. One needs only calculate principal, balances, penalties, and rates of interest. If you end up having to abandon your home or wander in other provinces, if your daughter ends up in a mining camp working as a prostitute, well, that's unfortunate, but incidental to the creditor. Money is money, and a deal is a deal. From this perspective, the crucial factor and the topic that will be explored at length in these pages is money's capacity to turn morality into a matter of impersonal arithmetic, and by doing so, to justify things that would otherwise seems outrageous or obscene. The factor of violence, which I have been emphasizing up until now, may appear secondary. The difference between a debt and mere moral obligations is not the presence or absence of men with weapons who can enforce that obligation by seizing the debtor's possession or threatening to break his legs. It is simply that a creditor has a means to specify numerically exactly how much the debtor owes.
Well done. Thank you so much, Nika.
Can I say something else?
Of course, please.
So I want to say that after this first Fight Club, I spoke with Cory Doctorow, who wrote a comment to the first one, and he had a really interesting idea about the father Fight Club and also about the whole debt issue that was discussed in the first Fight Club. And he was talking about technology, a current technology that has been developed now, because the major idea of Michael Hudson was that this quotes from ancient Mesopotamia, that the debts that cannot be paid would not be paid. And we know that through the history how it happens. When it's too many people who cannot pay their debts, it is a rebellion. But I think Cory Doctorow points correctly that now we have a technology that so much control us. Basically, it's under our skin, that the amount, like the way how the debts could be extracted is almost endless, because you can track people when they move in, you can cancel their social ties. That's China is showing it now very well. You know, you can just control people up until, you know, how can they buy the tickets to the plane and, you know, anything. So he's actually, Cory Doctorow is doubting that this will work for now. And that's a very fascinating development, you know, very scary, of course, that we're living through. So it's just like one of the comments that I want to share.
Anika, he also, Doctorow also mentions things like the collateral that can be extracted from you. All your favorite appliances could be terminated. You know, it's just endless. It's scary.
Yeah, up until selling your internal organs if you need to, whatever. Real dystopia could happen.
So now we can have a small discussion about what we've just read, or we can just like move on to the next quote. It's up to you. If someone has something to say, you know, don't hesitate to jump in. Otherwise, we're just going to go quotes after quotes. Any interventions from you guys? Can you guys hear me better like that?
Like that.
Okay.
That's clearer, yeah.
Okay. Shall we move to the next quote? So Simona, you're next in the lineup. Ready?
Ready. It's very funny. But there is a ball on the text.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you always like dancing.
Yeah, totally. So, shall I start?
Whenever
Maybe.
you're ready, Simona.
I'm ready. Maybe I can tell something about this text, or it's much on the line of the one that Nika chose. It's about how making a promise, an abstract and numerable thing, destroys human relationships, and about how economy couldn't exist without this making an abstract thing of human relationships, and putting as the only kind of human relationship the enemy relationship, that is the only one where barter actually exists in other societies and other cultures. It reminds me of Hobbes. Actually, his political theory is really grounded in this idea of a society of enemies. And what's fascinating in this book is that instead David shows how the normal human relationships are much different from this and are grounded in gifts and in owing without a proper expectation of getting something back, or even another quote I was about to choose was about an Indian that said, "I'm a human. That's why I will never ask you anything in exchange for what I'm giving you." And one other theme of this book that is fascinating for me is that of hospitality, and that is a relationship between foreigners. And ancient Mediterranean Sea was all connected by connections of hospitality, and that's still in our Southern European culture. It's very strong. Also, the idea that if you have food, you have to share it. You cannot eat in the presence of anybody without sharing. So I can start reading now.
Okay, and as Simona was mentioning, this another quote that she could have read. So Mark and I we put up a catalog of some of the quotes we liked, we found important or interesting. I'll send the editing link to you, and if you want to add anything, you are very welcome to do so. Okay, Simona, we are listening to you now.
Okay. Recall here the language of the economics textbooks. Imagine a society without money. Imagine a barter economy. One thing these examples make abundantly clear is just how limited the imaginative powers of most economists turn out to be. Why? The simplest answer would be for there to even be a discipline called economics, a discipline that concerns itself first and foremost with how individuals seek the most advantageous arrangement for the exchange of shoes for potatoes or cloth for spears, or it must assume that the exchange of such goods need to have nothing to do with war, passion, adventure, mystery, sex, or death. Economics assumes a division between different spheres of human behavior that among people like the Gunwingu and the Nambikwara simply does not exist. These divisions, in turn, are made possible by very specific institutional arrangements, the existence of lawyers, prisons, and police to ensure that even people who don't like each other very much, who have no interest in developing any kind of ongoing relationship, but are simply interested in getting their hands on as much of the other's possession as possible, will nonetheless refrain from the most obvious expedient, theft. This, in turn, allows us to assume that life is naturally divided between the marketplace, where we do our shopping, and the sphere of consumption, where we concern ourselves with music, feasts, and seduction. In other words, the vision of the world that forms the basis of the economics textbooks, which Adam Smith played so large a part in promulgating, has by now become so much of a part of our common sense that we find it hard to imagine any other possible arrangement. Swapping one thing directly for another while trying to get the best deal one can out of transaction is ordinarily how one deals with people one doesn't care about and doesn't expect to see again. What reason is there not to try to take advantage of such a person? If, on the other hand, one cares enough about someone, a neighbor, a friend, to wish to deal with her fairly and honestly, one will inevitably also care about her enough to take her individual needs, desires, and situation into account. Even if you do swap one thing for another, you are likely to frame the matter as a gift.
Thank you so much, Simona. A round of applause for Simona, please. Do you any reaction to what Simona has just said, just read?
Topsy, you are muted.
Okay. Any reaction from the audience about what Simona has just read? I'm mute again.
No, you're good.
Okay.
If nobody wants to jump in, I can add something about this text.
If you'd like to do so, Simona, yes, please.
It's such a, sorry, my video. It's such a rich text because there are so many themes in it. There is the theme of imagination, the idea that economics, modern time economics is a matter of imagination, and it's also capturing our imagination. We have difficulties. We are capable, but we have difficulties in imagining other ways to deal with each other. And even when it comes to care, we are not able to see how generous, how much freedom is there in our relationship. Freedom in the sense of giving and receiving for free without counting. And as I may have said in another meeting, I have seen what happens in a society when everything becomes about numbering exchanges, about counting exchanges, and when the human relationships are broken because everybody is your enemy and a potential thief. So it's very important to imagine that the world of consumption is not just consumption, is the real world, how it should be, how it could be just generosity and play and experiencing the joy of being together.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
I also think it's important that David wanted to write a next book about war, because in the fragment that Simona read, it's about communication. So basically you can read off people who you don't care about because you cease communication with them. You don't know them. They're not somebody who will be with you, after that. So, and the war is exactly this moment when you just want the other person to destroy you, disappear. But in a market, we don't care about these other people. They're just numbers. They're just somebody who give you 12% interest, and that's it. You don't know them. You don't see how exactly they pay their debts or whatever else they're doing. So it's all about communication in a way. If you set the different parameters, it wouldn't happen, looks like.
Anything else, or we're moving on to the next quote, which is going to be read by Carlos. So Carlos, get ready. Oh, and also it's because it's a bit of a well, it's not much longer than the other ones, but it's about a really important concept. It's about baseline communism, which is like one of the most important concepts of the book. So it's a long quote. If someone wants to join Carlos in reading that, someone who doesn't have a quote, you are very welcome to do so, right, Carlos?
Sure.
Any volunteer, or because Carlos can also read the whole thing, right? This is what you said.
Whatever you want me to read, I will read.
Okay, so if we don't have any volunteers, you're gonna have to read it all, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
No
I could help.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, so Carlos, you read it to in the presence of a sort of communism, and you start where at almost everyone follows this principle. Is that okay?
So I read till the presence of a sort of communism and then Topsy, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Is that okay? Is that okay,
Yeah,
Topsy,
sure.
for you? Do you have the text?
Yes, I do. I do have the text.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to share my.
Now, I don't have the text.
Okay. So in the In the doc I've just sent.
In the document?
Yep. In the doc I've just sent, it's this passage titled "Baseline Communism," with Carlos' name on it.
Yeah.
So it's the last paragraph, starting from "Almost everyone follows this principle." Is that a good top C?
I'm looking for it. Which page is it on? Oh yeah, I've got it.
Okay, perfect. Actually, you can read it on the prompt, but it can be a bit tricky.
Okay, I think okay. Yeah.
So, baseline communism, pages 95 to 96. Performer Carlos. Communism is not some magical utopia, and neither does it have anything to do with ownership of the means of production. It is something that exists right now, that exists to some degree in any human society, although there has never been one in which everything has been organized in that way. And it would be difficult to imagine how there could be. All of us act like communists a good deal of the time. None of us acts like a communist consistently. Communist society, in the sense of a society organized exclusively on that single principle, could never exist. But all social systems, even economic systems like capitalism, have always been built on top of a bedrock of actually existing communism. Starting, as I say, from the principle of from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs, allows us to look past the question of individual private ownership, which is often little more than a formal legality anyway, and at much more immediate and practical questions of who has access to what sort of things and under what conditions. Whenever it is the operative principle, even if it is just two people who are interacting, we can say we are in a presence of a sort of communism.
Almost everyone follows this principle if they are collaborating on some common project. If someone fixing a broken water pipe says, "Hand me the wrench," his co-worker will not, generally speaking, say, "And what do I get for it?" Even if they are working for ExxonMobil, Burger King, or Goldman Sachs, the reason is simple: efficiency. Ironically enough, considering the conventional wisdom that communism just doesn't work. If you really care about getting something done, the most efficient way to go about it is obviously to allocate tasks by ability and give people whatever they need to do them. One might even say that's one of the scandals of capitalism, that most capitalist firms internally operate communistically. True, they don't tend to operate very democratically. Most often they're organized around military-style, top-down chains of command. But there is often an interesting tension here, because top-down chains of command are not particularly efficient. They tend to promote stupidity among those on top, resentful foot-dragging among those on the bottom. The greater the need to improvise, the more democratic the cooperation tends to become. Investors have always understood this. Startup capitalists frequently figure it out, and computer engineers have recently rediscovered the principle, not only with things like freeware, which everyone talks about, but even in the organization of their businesses. Apple Computers is a famous example. It was founded by mostly Republican computer engineers who broke from IBM in Silicon Valley in the 1980s, forming little democratic circles of 20 or 40 people with their laptops in each other's garages. This is presumably also why, in the immediate wake of the great disasters, a flood, a blackout, or an economic collapse, people tend to behave the same way, reverting to a rough and ready communism. However briefly, hierarchies and markets and the like become luxuries that no one can afford. Anyone who has lived through such a moment can speak to their peculiar qualities, the way that strangers become sisters and brothers, and human society itself seems to be reborn. This is important because it shows that we are not simply talking about cooperation. In fact, communism is the foundation of all human sociability. It is what makes society possible.
Thank you so much to our two performers, our two new performers, because this is the first time we have you, Carlos and Topsy here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's always so nice to hear such a nice British accent that we will never achieve. But it's a great quote. I mean, this is for me the most important part of the book, because I have used it for my work a lot. I am finishing a book about something I call fiat socialism, and I think that what Graeber says here is the right way to understand communism, and the way to reborn the concept of communism, because the idea that traditional communism under the regime of Hegel has always told us that a system in which private property of the production of the means of production will eventually collapse inevitably. And in my opinion, that is what caused the collapse of the Soviet Union, regrettably. I mean, I think that this way of understanding communism goes away from this historical law that is absolutely wrong, and show us that if you understand money based on debt and based on credit, the property of the means of production is not the main factor for the sustainability of an economic system. I think that with this page, or with this quote, David Graeber makes the last great input to the concept of communism.
Yes, I agree. This view of the nature of money, David Graeber's understanding of debt as money, absolutely right. Yeah, a key insight that many people still misunderstand the commodity side of money. Still treat it like this. Yeah,
and it is the only consistent view of money, the only consistent view of money that we have according to the historical records. I mean, the metalist view is absolutely ahistorical. It's something that didn't happen, like you read before. The barter society and all this, it never happened. It never. It just is an invention of different economies, but there is something that never happened. What we really know is, according to the Mesopotamian records and other records, is that is debt and credit what gave rise to economics as we know it. In my opinion, you cannot understand the change between Neolithic times and Paleolithic times to Neolithic times without understanding this. This is what made us become what we are, the Neolithic society, advanced Neolithic society that we are.
Yeah, thank you. You said that it is actually, giving a really good definition of communism and kind of reviving the concept. But it's a funny thing to revive the concept with such an old definition. From each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. So this is something that was, that people were saying a long time ago. Like old communists always say that, and it has become a little bit old-fashioned nowadays. It's a funny way that it's reviving a definition by just like taking one of the oldest definitions of communism. Quite paradoxical, is it?
I think that the most important part is when he says that in reality communism is who has access to what sort of things and under what conditions. That is the main point of communism. What can I do, or what can I expect? What are my rights, and who doesn't have these rights? I mean, do I have the right to public education, to universal healthcare, to a pension, to a house, to be fed, things like this? What and who gets what? And that is the main point. That is what made communism spread in half of the planet. People didn't see other ways to be able to go to the hospital when they were sick, or to be able to learn how to read and write, or to be able to retire when they are old. And that is what the main point of communism is. Not a pseudo religion saying that if you allowed the guy next door to have a bar downstairs, the whole system will collapse. Nobody really believed that. And that is what the problem, what he calls mythic or mythical communism is. That pseudo religion that was created around the property of the means of production. That was the problem. If we had focused on this definition, communism would have been unstoppable, I think.
I just wanted to say that this definition of Graeber's of baseline communism is very similar to this definition that radical feminists were working with in the middle of the 20th century. They were basically calling it matriarchy, because obviously they look at every culture on the planet and they see that no culture on earth does a mother charge the child for their care. And so they have basically built a theory around it that says, well, if every instance of patriarchy has to have some form of matriarchy, otherwise it will not survive. Much like what Graeber says, that every single culture will have some form of baseline communism, because, at least in the relationship of the mother and the child, and usually within the family. Just another comment, when, I don't know who's reading the Dawn of Everything, but I've been about this quote, communism doesn't work. If you read if you read the letter that this Turgot guy sends to this woman, he makes all the anti-communist points that any single person bitching about communism on Twitter will make, and it's from 1750. So you can always just say, hang on a minute, people have been saying that communism doesn't work since, before Marx was even born. So it's some sort of projection from our own culture that we just want it to not work, or we cannot imagine it, or something there is not working.
Yeah, this is the really poor imagination that Simona was reading before. Sevda, are you ready? You are the next performer. Simona, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sorry. There is another reason for the inefficiency of market and of capitalism. And this is something Italian operaism theorized. Actually, it is the workers, those who cooperate at the bottom of the industry. It's them who know the job and who do, not just who do the job, but also who take in the innovation and the ideas that are mostly ideas on how to work less. And the inefficiency of a hierarchy is exactly in having somebody who either just spoils this Baselian cooperation, or even blocks it with authority, with silly ideas that come from not knowing the real job that happens at the bottom of the hierarchy. And this is also a part of what went wrong with state capitalism that was called real socialism. The Soviet Union never called itself communism. The idea that you should organize work top down, this simply dispels the creativity and the ability of workers. And by the way, the sentence from each according to his ability is attributed not to Marx but to Louis Blanc, who was a promoter of workers' cooperatives. And this is meaningful, in my opinion.
Thank you, Simona. So Sevda, shall we move on? Are you ready to perform? Don't forget to turn on your mic.
Yes, I am ready. Okay. Markets. Markets aren't real. They are mathematical models created by imagining a self-contained world where everyone has exactly the same motivation and the same knowledge and is engaging in the self-interested calculating exchange. Economists are aware that reality is always more complicated, but they are also aware that to come up with a mathematical model, one always has to make the world into a bit of a cartoon. There is nothing wrong with this. The problem comes when it enables some, often these same economists, to declare that anyone who ignores the dictates of the market shall surely be punished, or that since we live in a market system, everything except government interference is based on principles of justice, that our economic system is one vast network of reciprocal relations in which, in the end, the accounts balance and all debts are paid.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Oh my God.
So if I remember well, this quote is from the same chapter that we've just read about baseline communism, but it's in the section about reciprocity.
I just want to give you experience of mine here since I moved here. It's been like 4 months, I guess. I still have a tourist status here in Turkey. And just another day, I had a panic attack. And so I went to a private hospital. Private and public hospitals here are differ, as of course, I think you know how it must differ in other countries as well. And so it was just a very basic treatment, I just wanted to know how I'm doing. So it was nothing really like operational thing. So before they said, okay, just for that, you have to give us 500 liras. That is, if you multiply it in 3, because I have Iranian money with me, it is too much, So I decided to leave the private hospital to the public one. And it was still too high for me. It was 250 lira. So it's still too much for me. So how it is, if I, if I feel worse, are you gonna let me die or what? It was, how they say, in Iran we have saying like the capitalism is breaking my bones and back, and it is. I'm feeling it with all my body. That it was the worst experience I ever could have. And actually the panic happened in a mall where a doctor came actually, and I had a very basic treatment in the beginning, and all he was doing was that he had a camera on his on his dress code, uniform, and he was trying to only film me, record me, and he was not really into just making things better for me. I don't want to say that this is really bad here or the healthcare system is really bad. No, I don't mean that, but I wanted kind of a care I had when I'm back in Iran, So it was a very unfortunate experience in the beginning of my journey in a new country.
That sounds awful. Thank you for sharing. How are you now?
I'm better. I feel good. I feel good. Yeah. It's different. It's really strange, I don't just feel like I have immigrated, because there are so cultural similarities between my culture and here, and I know the language. There's no language barrier, but the capitalist system is too obvious here. And but in Iran, because I was raised in a socialist time, kind of, the culture was still under the socialist socialist, how to say, culture. It was a kind of a socialist culture. So so even when I moved from my hometown to a bigger town, like in a capital town of Tehran, I felt so overwhelmed, and it was so. And now I moved to another country. It's still, capitalism just is like a wind comes to your face all the time. Yeah. And one thing which is so different from Iran and Turkey is that this advertisement thing, it's in Iran, it's not that much. You can barely see any advertisement like everywhere, but here, from the first steps in the airport, you can see it clearly. It comes again like a wind to your face. Yeah.
That's a very good metaphor.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to, you know, how am I going to act upon it? You know, am I going to feel it's okay, let's move on thing, or shall I, you know, prepare something? Shall I create something? Is something going to create in me, like I want to be against it and do something, act against it, something like that. I'm in a phase of this mode of, you know, these modes and feelings. And you know, for example, our meeting here tonight is one of those acts, actually, I believe, for me at least. When I talk now, I can express my feelings here because, and you know, even go, you know, I want to start a school here at university, and it's really hard to get a scholarship because of my age. And it's really, really bad. You know, everything is like blocked. You have to act on time. Okay, I'm 30 now, but I want to just start over again, but they're not gonna let you do that. It's like, no, you have to be under 21 or at least 25. So it's always, you know, every time you want to just move on and something happens and they just stop you from just doing like everybody else, like what everybody else does.
That sounds quite about right with the text of Graeber, which I think that what he really wants to say is that the market comes after the state, not before. I mean, that is the, in my opinion, the main point of the quote that you read. You know, it's not that that at the beginning we had the market and then based upon the market we created the states. No. There is no market without the state. The state always comes before the market.
Right. Yeah.
And the state tells you if you can study or you can go to the hospital, or what doctor you get and what doctor you don't get, and how much you have to pay, etc. And in what currency you have to pay, which is very important.
Yeah. And one thing, I'm sorry if I'm speaking too much. Next to that private hospital, you know, it's private, everything, the cost is high. Just right next to it, there are families with poor families. You know, just imagine if someone from that family got sick, they will not be able to go to that hospital just right next to them. They have to go and find another hospital where they can pay. And it was so mind-blowing. Yeah.
I was just sharing in the chat a quote from I think chapter 2 about that says stateless societies tend also to be without markets, which is exactly what Carlos was talking about.
Yeah.
Mark, are you ready for your performance now?
Can I just say one thing? If anyone
Yes,
is
please,
interested,
Mary. Yeah, of course.
and if anyone is more interested in this idea that markets do not work from an economic perspective, Yanis Varoufakis has a really good lecture where he basically debunks how they don't work, like from an economics perspective. They don't work mathematically for anything other than like lemons and potatoes. That's, you know, vegetables, but for things, everything else, it just doesn't. Just thought I can give you the link if you guys want, that's all.
Yes,
Oh,
please share it in the chat. So Mark, you're going to tell us about slavery. We actually have quite a lot of slavery quotes in our catalog because yeah, that's a big topic. Also some about patriarchy, and this is I think it's chapter 8, which is a really important chapter. Maybe in one of our coming reading groups we can have a look at this chapter. and discuss it. That would be interesting.
So can I just say something first, Vasily?
Yes, please.
It's going to be referring to Ekiano, and he's somebody from Africa who survived being a slave, and he wrote an autobiography. He became part of the English abolitionist movement. So then that will make sense. And then I have something to add afterwards, if that's okay. Okay.
Whenever you're ready, Mark.
All right. Readers of Ekiano's book are often troubled by one aspect of the story, that for most of his early life, he was not opposed to the institution of slavery. At one point, while saving money to buy his freedom, he even briefly took a job that involved purchasing slaves in Africa. Ekiano only came around to an abolitionist position after converting to Methodism, and falling in with religious activists against the trade. Many have asked, why did it take him so long? Surely, if anyone had reason to understand the evils of slavery, he did. The answer seems, oddly, to lie in the man's very integrity. One thing that comes through strikingly in this book, in the book that he wrote, is that this was not only a man of endless resourcefulness and determination, but above all, a man of honor. Yet this created a terrible dilemma. To be made a slave is to be stripped of any possible honor. Ekiano wished above all else to regain what had been taken from him. The problem is that honor is, by definition, something that exists in the eyes of others. To be able to recover it, then, the slave must necessarily adopt the rules and standards of the society that surrounds him. And this means that in practice, at least, he cannot absolutely reject the institutions that deprived him of his honor in the first place. It strikes me that this experience of only being able to restore one's lost honor, to regain the ability to act with integrity by acting in accord with the terms of a system that one knows through deeply traumatic personal experience to be utterly unjust, is itself one of the most profoundly violent aspects of slavery. It is another example, perhaps, of the need to argue in the master's language, but here taken to insidious extremes. All societies based on slavery tend to be marked by this agonizing double consciousness. The awareness that the highest things one has to strive for are also ultimately wrong, but at the same time, the feeling that this is simply the nature of reality. This might help explain why throughout most of history, when slaves did rebel against their masters, they rarely rebelled against slavery itself. But the flip side of this is that even slave owners seem to feel that the whole arrangement was somehow fundamentally perverse or unnatural. First-year Roman law students, for example, for instance, were made to memorize the following definition. Slavery is an institution according to the law of nations whereby one person falls under the property rights of another, contrary to nature.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, sure. And I just wanted to add, because it's part of the enjoyment, well, I shouldn't say enjoyment, the power of David's works. Even the footnotes are amazing. And so there's a footnote to that last quote, and he's giving the footnote for where it came from, but added in the footnote, he's saying, it is interesting to note that when attempts are made to justify slavery, starting with Aristotle, they generally focus not on the institution, which is not in itself justifiable, but on the inferior qualities of some ethnic group being enslaved. And so I'm giving that as an example of all the sort of jewels that David plants throughout the works that allow us to, come to grips with these things. And the reason I chose this excerpt was when we had a reading group when the debt came out, right in 2011. And I was amazed by the book, but I had a visceral reaction to David's analysis of slavery. And it was because, I've read of slavery, but the way the author presents things and builds up, it's like, this is the beginning of that chapter, by the way, on honor and degradation. That's just the beginning of the chapter. And then it's going to build up. And then you have the footnotes. And it's these layers that are building up. It's like reading fiction so that you actually understand what it means. So he builds up to Orlando Patterson's Slavery and Social Death. And you actually have such an appreciation for what that means, just socially dead. That was just so powerful to me. It was the first time that I thought I understood, as far as somebody who's not been a slave, what it meant to be in that status. And then finally, this is tying back into the chapter 5 of The Dawn of Everything, where they are mentioning, both Davids, that slavery seems to be an end product of a distortion of care. And, to me, that's like another thing that they're giving us, here's something to investigate. Why would care be distorted to that extent that it would become slavery? And I'm thinking of property, but it still doesn't explain, how does it become that distorted? And there's another jewel now in that latest book. That's why I think it's like a manifesto. And then the last thing, I'm sorry to go on, but this ties in so much with the US prison system. And the questions that we're bringing up now about slavery and the genocide of Native Americans here. The US prison system is the current slavery. And so that remark at the beginning that he makes, that we tend to blame the people that are in the institution rather than the institution itself, that's exactly what's going on. And they're not paid enough. It's just slavery all over again, and in the millions of people. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hence the need when you read David Graeber's book to read the notes as well, because he's actually reading short books which are extremely long if you add up the notes. They are so interesting, and they really always add a layer of understanding to his writing. I think they are really, really important.
And it's strange, the overall effect, of understanding in this way, that's where he gives us hope. A true understanding is actually giving us hope.
Yes, that can actually be the final word. That's very powerful, I think. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for and welcome to the new people. It's always nice to see new faces. We'll try to have another karaoke reading group sometime soon, and maybe on some other theme, maybe care. We have to think about that. And also, if someone wants to be the facilitator or DJ, you're very welcome to do so. It's meant to be a collective project, so everybody's welcome to do that. I'll be really happy to step back. Thank you so much. Nika, do you want to add a final word? Sorry.
I have a question from Nika. Nika, do you know when was, David was, in his, when was it when David was, there's something wrong with this world? It was in his teens, or like, when was it? What happened that he realized that, okay, there's something in this wrong with this world, and so something happened, must have happened, and that made him rise up. What do you know what I mean?
I don't think it was one point. I think he grew up, in the family of his father went to fight in the civil war in Spain, and I think he has like an oppositional party in his household to whatever was going on in his country at that point, something like that. But I think David was always very positive. He was always trying to make bridges instead of building walls. And it wasn't like he was never pointing out on a group of people or on the countries or, on the system. If to me, like how he described communism or capitalism is always like digging in and thinking how we can rearrange it from inside. That's what was a very big difference between him and any sectarian people, including sectarian leftists. At least that's how I understand that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you
Okay.
later.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.